So Nigeria's central bank, under new leadership, is planning to intervene in the country's foreign exchange market periodically to boost liquidity. At the same time, it's ended an 8-year ban on 43 items that had been restricted from accessing foreign exchange on the official market. The ban, which covered items like rice, cement and poultry, was imposed as part of the unorthodox policies of the previous administration of President Buhari in an effort to prop up the naira. The news has been welcomed by some analysts and investors who had been warning against capital controls. They've also welcomed the pledge by the new central bank governor, Olayemi Cardoso, to quickly clear the bank's backlog of unsettled foreign exchange obligations of about $7 billion. It all sounds like cheering news, doesn't it? However, the predictions are that the cost of living crisis in Nigeria looks certain to get worse before it gets better. The shortage of foreign currency, for instance, is preventing fuel imports, which the majority of businesses and households need for transport and to power generators in the absence of electricity. Meanwhile, the naira continues its dramatic fall in value. So what should we make of these so-called market-friendly steps being taken by the Tinubu government? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from our Lagos studios by the CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise and former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Dr. Yusuf, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, what's your reaction to the news that the central bank has ended an 8-year ban on 43 items that had been restricted from the official forex market?
Well, for me, I think it's a welcome development because I see it as a form of policy normalization. In the first place, the decision of the central bank to exclude some items from the foreign exchange market, borders on fiscal policy decision. Because it is within the framework of fiscal policy or trade policy that we normally should determine what can come in and what should not come in. Secondly, many manufacturers have complained that even some of their raw materials have been included on that list. And they made several pleas to the former CBN governor to no avail. So from the perspective of the appropriateness of the policy and the fact that some of the items on the list were actually not supposed to be on the list, I think it's a welcome development. Because ideally, when we are talking about trade policy, it should sit squarely within the purview of the fiscal authorities. And that was part of the challenges we had under the previous administration, where the CBN was all over the place and where there was no proper policy coherence. Now, that is not to say that just anything can come in. The fiscal authorities still have the responsibility to look at the list again, and if there are items there that we don't desire, especially at a time like this, the fiscal authorities can take action. They can increase the tariff, they can include it on import prohibition list, but at least we have better clarity and more sanity in the international trade process. So that is my view about it.
Well, thank you for those opening remarks. So basically, to summarize, you see it as a good market-friendly step in the direction, for instance, of unifying the exchange rates and easing pressure on the naira in the parallel market from where importers of those 43 items had to access foreign exchange.
Yes, that is true. Because they could not have access to the official window, a lot of their demands, have been putting a lot of pressure on the parallel market. And that has been contributing to the increasing divergence between the official rate and the parallel market rate. But more importantly, to deal with the issue of the exchange rate, I think the more fundamental thing is to deal with the issue of supply, because there is a limit to which this policy can actually enhance, the strength of the naira. The fundamental issue has to do with supply, and it has to do with also our progress around import substitution. I think those are the two fundamental things.
Those are very good points. And the central bank also plans, according to the new central bank governor, to intervene in the foreign exchange market periodically to boost liquidity. And is that a good thing?
It's a good thing, and that is what has always been anyway. Under the previous dispensation in 2022, the CBN intervened to the tune of about 17 billion US dollars in 2022. That was an average of about 1.5 billion naira, $1.5 billion per month. But at that time, of course, the then administration was able to mop up liquidity from all manner of places to be able, to intervene. But the current administration doesn't have that kind of privilege, to be able to intervene as much as the previous administration did. So that is why we have the kind of challenge that we have. And the situation had been further worsened by all the revelations that came out from the audit of the central bank. Because we thought we had a much more robust reserves, but from all the information that has been coming out, the situation is quite there. And that has fueled significantly the speculative activities, panic buying, front-loading of requests, and all manner of things. So that is what has worsened and created a major crisis of confidence in the foreign exchange markets currently.
So, how are investors likely to react to all of that?
Well, naturally, investors are very cautious, particularly foreign investors, because we had expected at the inception of this policy reform that it was going to trigger or incentivize a lot of inflows, both from the FDI and from foreign portfolio flows. But unfortunately, because of the crisis of confidence that has been created, those inflows have not been coming in. Because when you have a situation where you have a backlog of close to maybe 10 billion US dollars, you have foreign investors whose funds are stuck here, you have a crisis with our letters of credit, which we cannot fund, you have all manner of maturing obligations, you have the airlines whose funds are stuck here. That is terrible signaling to any foreign investor. So that has not, made it possible for investors to come as some of us had projected, that if we go this route of a market-friendly foreign exchange market, we should expect more inflows. But it has not happened because of the crisis of confidence that the current situation has generated. So for investors, it will take some time. The CBN governor has assured that is going to prioritize the clearing of backlog and all of that. So we'll see how far we go with that. Because unless we deal with that, it will be difficult to attract a lot more investors to bring in their money. And for domestic investors, it's a major crisis for many of them right now. Many of them have suspended operations. Many have scaled down their production. Many of them are running at a huge loss, because you have an economy that is highly sensitive to volatilities in the exchange rates. And there's no liquidity in the air and in window. So practically everybody now is in the either parallel market or in the interbank market. So it's a major challenge, both at least for domestic investors, and our capacity to attract foreign investors has also been greatly impaired because of what has happened.
Well, you've kind of led me into the domestic sort of situation, because I wanted to talk about that and the kind of impact this cost of living crisis is having on the livelihoods of Nigerians. Because clearly, as you said, there is a foreign exchange crunch. And because of this, independent petroleum marketers, for instance, have not been able to import fuel because they can't access foreign exchange from the government window. I understand it's only NNPC that's importing at the moment?
Well, the situation is quite challenging, both for the economic players and for the citizens. Right now, the social cost of the reforms has been quite horrendous. It has been quite profound, particularly from the point of view of the cost of food, the cost of energy, and the cost of transportation, which is also related to the cost of logistics. The impact has been, disproportionately higher than what we expected it to be. So that is why some of us felt that the government needed to have reacted or responded much more quickly, to the social outcomes of these reforms. I'm not talking about giving bags of rice or giving some palliatives and all of that. I'm talking about interventions that are systemic, that will address, those at the bottom of the pyramid, because the pain is quite enormous. And the situation has been much worse because in some of these critical sectors, we don't have a very strong presence of the public sector, of government. For instance, in transportation, almost 99% of transportation needs are delivered by the private sector. Unlike what you have abroad, where you have very strong government presence, where government invests and subsidizes transportation. We don't have that here. So that, of course, is a major issue. So I think the government needs to respond much more quickly, fundamentally, and systemically, so that you can have a trickle down of some of these palliatives. And we should be looking more in the direction of policy-driven palliatives, not just handing out things to people. We don't have the database to be able to do cash transfers and things as we have abroad. And coming back to the issue of the importation of petroleum products, well, what is affecting the manufacturers and other sectors of the economy is also affecting the oil marketers, because there's no liquidity in the FX market, particularly in the A&E window. And if they opt to go to the interbank or go to the parallel market to source FX, at what rate? At over 1,000? If they import at that rate, how are they going to sell it? So it's a no-brainer that they have to surrender everything back to the NMPC, at least for this period, to see how far the situation will go. But right now, I don't think the economics of importation of private sector involvement in the importation or delivery of petroleum products does not support any such action for now.
And of course, in addition to what you've just said, you've still got smuggling of fuel out of Nigeria to places like Benin Republic, Niger, Cameroon, etc. How much is that impacting on consumption here? Because it seems the government either doesn't have the machinery or the will to stop large-scale smuggling.
Well, it is possible that there will be some smuggling, but certainly not at the scale that we used to know, because the price differential now is much narrower. But I must admit, given what is happening globally with oil price, gradually I think the price differential is beginning to increase. So we expect that by now, I'm sure some of this smuggling will be taking place, but certainly not at the scale at which it was before. But, well, we have very limited capacity to cause smuggling, because those who are supposed to man the border posts, either some of them are compromised or they don't have the capacity, or because we also have very porous borders, all over the place, running to several kilometers. So these are some of the challenges we face. The whole idea at the beginning or to ensure a kind of equalization of price so that there will be no incentive to smuggle. But because the government has now decided at least to pause the increases in PMS price for social reasons, this divergence has started to emerge. So, we should expect that by now some of this smuggling also have resumed.
Right, and of course, Nigeria's refineries aren't working, are they? Are you encouraged by the current government's promises that they'll start to function soon?
Well, for some of these pronouncements, I mean, it is better to relate with what we see, what happens, rather than relate with what promises are made. The minister has assured us and all of that, but I think it is better, going by the benefit of experience to see what is actually delivered and when these things will be delivered. If that happens, I mean, that is part of the things I think can take us out of some of this crisis, because we need to deal with the issue of import substitution. The importation of petroleum products is putting a lot of pressure on our foreign exchange. In fact, it's the biggest import bill, the biggest component of import bill in our import basket. And it's really very sad. It's a sad commentary that for 8 years we have an administration that could not fix the refineries. I don't know what excuse you want to give for that. So we are hoping that with what the present administration is doing, let's hope that something will happen. But again, when you relate even the refineries to the consumption, to the demand, the gap is still huge. We're also hoping that with the Dangote refinery, if it comes on stream, maybe that will also help, at least to douse some of this tension. It's not as if it's going to return the subsidy, but at least we have a much more flexible situation, to be able to manage the current crisis that we have.
So, I mean, in the context of the smuggling that we talked about, coupled with the fact that, as you know, the refineries aren't working, I mean, do you agree with the president's decision to end subsidy on fuel, which has made fuel more expensive for Nigerians? Or do you think the variables aren't being properly managed? You sort of hinted at that earlier.
No, the decision to put an end to subsidy is a very fundamental reform that we needed to take, because the economy was bleeding profusely as a result of it. The same thing with the foreign exchange convergence. The economy was bleeding. There was so much distortion, there was so much looting, there was so much smuggling. So we had no choice. It's something that was inevitable. But the challenge is that, yes, we have taken the steps. What are we doing about the social outcomes? That is what we need to do very quickly. I was expecting that by now, beyond what the humanitarian affairs is doing and some of these things that are being distributed, we should have seen the deployment of fiscal policies, import duty regimes, import duty concessions on critical areas that will impact on the cost of living. I expected an engagement with those who are in the food sector, the entire agri value chain, to see what incentives the government can quickly deliver, either by removing taxes or removing import duty and things like that, so that we can have a reduction in the cost of food, particularly staple food. I expect the same thing to happen with respect to even transportation. What are we doing about import duty on all of these buses? In addition to whatever the government is doing, the private sector can also complement. But we need to roll out fiscal incentives to the private sector and say, okay, we are suspending import duty on buses of capacity, passenger capacity of 18-seater and above, so that more companies can buy buses for their staffs, more transporters can buy buses, more governments, state government, we can buy more buses. These are some of the things that can be done. The same thing with CNG. Yes, it is a good thing that we are importing CNG vehicles and all of that. But what I want to see is a policy statement that we are removing all forms of import duty on CNG components, CNG vehicles, renewable energy equipment, solar panels, inverters. Let us remove taxes and duty on everything so that the citizens can have access to some of these things. If you want to convert your car now to CNG, I understand it's costing about 300,000. How many people can afford that? So we need to deploy a lot more of tax incentives, a lot more of import duty or fiscal incentives, so that this thing can systemically trickle down to a wider segment of the population.
Well, I mean, you're obviously a man who has...
These are some of the things I think we can do.
Sure. You're obviously a man who has a lot of experience. You're the CEO of the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. You're a former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I hope the powers that be and those who make decisions are listening to the very important points you made here. Dr. Muda Yusuf, I want to thank you very much indeed. And he was talking to me there from our studios in Lagos.